"Get her off that helicopter right now," Valerie Kent screamed, her voice cutting through the roar of the rotors. She lunged forward, clutching at the doorframe like she owned the sky. "This is a restricted community event. You're violating HOA policy." The cameras from the local news station were already rolling, catching every second. Nora barely turned before Valerie's hand struck her shoulder and shoved. The wind exploded between them. For a split second, my wife's body slipped from the edge of the open cabin. Every sound vanished, just the echo of her name in my throat and the sight of her disappearing into the glare of sun and canyon. They said the HOA only enforced neighborhood peace. They didn't mention it could kill someone. Valerie Kent, president of the Eagle Crest Bluffs Homeowners Association, was the kind of woman who believed the law ended at her front porch. Her pearl earrings didn't shake when she lied. The crowd below gasped, and Valerie turned pale as Nora's harness lines snapped taut and kept her from falling into the canyon. The helicopter jerked, the pilot cursing through the headset. The cameras zoomed closer. Valerie's face drained of color. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She'd just made her biggest mistake live on air. You might think that kind of insanity couldn't happen in a gated community, but that's where you'd be wrong. Subscribe now because what unfolded in the days after this would change every rule about HOA power, FAA law, and the meaning of justice in a neighborhood built on fear. My name's Ethan Calloway. I spent 20 years in the Navy SEALs, specializing in aerial insertions and rescue operations. These days, I'm a private aviation safety consultant, contracted by the same agencies Valerie now had to answer to. She thought she was dealing with another veteran trying to relive his glory days. She didn't realize I wrote the very compliance manuals she was breaking. That helipad behind my house wasn't a toy. It was a certified emergency landing site, approved by CAL FIRE after I lost 2 friends in a canyon fire 3 years ago. They couldn't be airlifted because the closest clear zone was 12 miles away. After that, I promised myself I'd never live anywhere I couldn't evacuate my wife safely if the land burned again. That promise became the reason we bought the property at Eagle Crest Bluffs, a cliffside development marketed for safety-minded professionals. Valerie hated it the moment she saw it. She called it an eyesore, a risk, a liability. Anything that didn't fit her plastic-perfect version of paradise was a threat. She filed her first violation within a week of our arrival, claiming aerial disturbance. The HOA rules mentioned noise limits, not flight zones. She didn't care. She saw my wife's paramedic uniform one morning and sneered, asking if she practiced landings for fun. That's who Valerie Kent was, control disguised as order, cruelty wrapped in policy. When the local news asked for a wildfire readiness demonstration, Nora volunteered to show how the pad worked. She wanted to prove we weren't breaking laws, we were saving lives. Valerie showed up uninvited with her clipboard and her smug smile. I warned her not to go near that aircraft. She laughed, said, "You people think your military habits make you untouchable." Then she boarded. It's funny. People like her never understand that structure doesn't mean weakness. The same discipline that makes us calm in chaos is the one that makes us unstoppable afterward. The harness Nora wore? My idea. Standard SEAL safety protocol. Never enter a rotary aircraft without a tether in place. Valerie thought she'd pushed my wife to her death. She didn't realize she'd only dropped the match that would burn her reputation down. As the pilot steadied the chopper, Nora dangled safely, then was reeled back inside. The crowd below started filming with their phones. I saw the flash of a news drone tracking the scene from above, its camera red light blinking like an accusation. I didn't shout. I didn't move. I just stared at Valerie as she shrank into the corner seat, eyes wide, trembling at what she'd done. She tried to say something, but the words vanished under the rotors. That moment wasn't just a fall. It was the start of a reckoning, one that would bring in federal investigators, dissolve an entire HOA board, and remind everyone that arrogance has altitude limits. I'd kept my promise before, to the men who burned on that ridge. This time, I was keeping it for my wife. Because when you shove a Navy SEAL's family out of the sky, you'd better pray they don't land on your doorstep next. The roar of the rotors still echoed in my ears when the dust settled that night. The pad lights flickered off one by one, leaving only the canyon wind and the faint scent of aviation fuel. Valerie Kent had fled before the cameras stopped rolling, her blazer caught on the door latch as she scrambled out. My wife was safe, but the footage had already spread. By morning, our mailbox was full of violation notices printed in red. Unsafe flight practices, community endangerment, unauthorized use of restricted airspace. Valerie wasn't ashamed. She was retaliating. That's how HOA tyrants survive. They don't back down when caught. They double down. I spent the night reviewing my flight log data, time-stamped to the second, synced with FAA-certified software. Everything about our demonstration had been compliant. The helicopter's approach vector, noise level, and altitude were all approved. Valerie didn't know it yet, but every piece of evidence she mailed me only confirmed her overreach. At dawn, I walked across the property line to retrieve the latest notice. It fluttered on the gate, laminated like a warning from royalty. Immediate fine, $1,500. Failure to comply will result in legal escalation. Signed, Valerie Kent, HOA President. My hand tightened around the page until it crumpled. Down the road, Roger Haynes' utility cart idled near the curb. He looked away when I caught his eye. Maintenance badge on his chest, clipboard in hand. He was already documenting violations. The man wasn't cruel, just terrified. Valerie's power came from fear, not respect. I waved him over. "Morning, Roger." He hesitated before stepping closer. "Morning, Ethan." His eyes darted toward the house. "She's making me take new measurements. Says the landing pad violates setback rules." "Even after the FAA certification?" I asked. "She doesn't care," he muttered. "Says federal codes don't override HOA bylaws." That line would come back to haunt her. Roger's words told me what I needed to know. Valerie was escalating the paperwork war. She was trying to drown me in bureaucracy before the authorities could see her mistake. But paper cuts can turn into evidence, and I was trained to use every scrap. By noon, I was sitting in my office overlooking the ridge, analyzing aerial maps and archive bylaws. The legal difference between an aircraft pad and a recreational structure mattered now. Eagle Crest Bluffs was built on a special zoning permit approved by the county fire marshal, a clause Valerie had probably never read. That permit wasn't just paperwork, it was a lifeline. It granted emergency use rights to any certified operator during wildfire season. And guess who signed that authorization 3 years ago? Me. I smiled when I found my own signature on the scanned document. Valerie was trying to outlaw something the county had mandated. That's when Nora walked in, her uniform still dusty from her shift. "You're not sleeping," she said quietly. "Neither are you." She looked at the pile of notices on my desk and sighed. "She's scared. The video's everywhere, but she'll come harder now." I nodded. "Good, let her." Out in the cul-de-sac, HOA board members were already whispering. You could feel the paranoia creeping through the neighborhood. They'd followed Valerie for years because she made them feel safe, insulated. But safety built on intimidation doesn't last long once the mask cracks. Later that evening, I attended the mandatory HOA inspection meeting at the clubhouse. The air was heavy with perfume and pretense. Valerie sat at the head of the table, her posture as stiff as the mahogany behind her. She avoided my eyes but spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "you violated multiple community policies. The board has decided your helipad will be removed within 30 days. I let the silence hang. Every neighbor's gaze bounced between us. "Before you proceed," I said, sliding a copy of the county permit across the table, "you might want to check Section 14B, Emergency Operations. This community's emergency certification is tied to that pad. Remove it, and your insurance classification changes to non-compliant, which means no coverage." The room went dead silent, a few gasps. Even Roger, standing at the back, lowered his clipboard. For the first time, Valerie's confidence cracked. Her fingers twitched against her papers. She wasn't expecting me to have the law on my side, let alone one she'd never read. "That's not verified," she stammered. "Oh, it's verified," I said evenly. "You can call the county yourself. They'll confirm it's registered under CAL FIRE's operational database." That's when I saw it, the fear flickering behind her eyes. Not guilt, fear of exposure. She knew that if she pushed further, her ignorance would become public record. I walked out before she could recover, leaving the permit copy on the table like a loaded weapon. That night, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The board lights stayed on long past midnight. And I knew Valerie Kent wasn't done fighting. She was just realizing the battlefield had shifted. Because for the first time, she wasn't dealing with a homeowner. She was dealing with someone trained to win under pressure. And her next move would bring the FAA to her doorstep. By the next morning, the HOA clubhouse looked less like a board office and more like a war bunker. The blinds were drawn, chairs scattered, and Valerie's voice leaked through the walls, sharp, controlled, and desperate. I waited by the maintenance shed across the courtyard, pretending to check the pad's drainage logs while the real battle played out inside. Roger Haynes was in there with her. I could hear his name, the edge in her tone, the sound of papers slamming against the table. "Do you understand your duties, Roger?" she barked. "If I say that pad violates height restrictions, it violates them. No excuses. Document it. I want photos and timestamps. Now." The door flew open. Roger stepped out, pale, sweat glistening at his temples. He saw me and froze, clipboard trembling slightly in his grip. For a moment, neither of us spoke. His eyes darted toward the security camera perched above the door, then to the clipboard, then to the ground. His conscience was visible in every nervous twitch. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He nodded too quickly. "Just a lot of work." "You're being asked to falsify those records, aren't you?" His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down at his hands like the truth might be written there. Roger wasn't built for confrontation. His shoulders were always rounded, his voice always just shy of firm, but his job made him the gatekeeper of everything. Security footage, maintenance logs, access codes. He saw everything Valerie wanted hidden, and I could see the weight of it eating at him. When he finally spoke, it came out like a confession. "She wants me to backdate the violation. Reports. Make it look like your helipad was under review before the incident." He swallowed hard. "If I refuse, she'll claim I'm complicit. I've got a mortgage here, Ethan. Kids in the district." "You think helping her saves you?" I asked. He winced. "I don't know anymore." The truth was written all over his body. His shoulders tensed when he lied, loosened when he told the truth. Every time Valerie's name came up, his fingers gripped the clipboard tighter until the edges bent. He wasn't a bad man, just caught between fear and integrity. "Listen," I said, lowering my voice. "The FAA is already watching this development after the broadcast. If you falsify data, you'll be in the report too." Roger's breath hitched. "She said no one outside the HOA has jurisdiction here." I almost smiled. "Then she's never read Federal Aviation Code. The moment she stepped onto that helicopter, she put herself under FAA investigation." He rubbed his eyes like the truth burned. "I just wanted a quiet job. Keep the lawns neat. Fix the sprinklers." "Then help me keep this place safe the way it's supposed to be," I said. "Just do your job by the book. That's all I need." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out across the cul-de-sac, where the morning sun hit the roofs like glass. The same neighbors who waved at him every morning now peeked from behind curtains, afraid of choosing sides. Valerie's grip on them was stronger than any law. Roger knew that helping me meant exile. "I can't," he whispered. "Not yet." "You don't have to," I said. "Not until you're ready." He nodded faintly and turned away. But I noticed something. He didn't throw the clipboard into his cart like usual. He tucked it under his arm, shielding it like a secret he wasn't ready to lose. Later that afternoon, I found new violation flags planted along my fence line. Unpermitted structure, improper safety barrier. None of it made sense. Valerie was improvising now, trying to bury me in fake codes. I photographed each one, logged the timestamps, and emailed everything to my CAL FIRE liaison. Every move she made was now evidence. As dusk fell, I saw Roger again, this time by the service shed near the clubhouse. He was locking up when Valerie approached him, her heels striking the pavement like metronomes of control. I stayed in the shadows, watching. Her body language screamed ownership, chin high, shoulders forward, smile tight enough to cut. Rogers, on the other hand, told another story, his back hunched as if bracing for a hit that never came. She spoke quietly, almost sweetly. He nodded, expression blank, but his foot tapped against the concrete, fast and erratic. When she finally walked away, he exhaled so deeply his entire frame deflated. Then, in one quiet motion, he slipped a folded sheet of paper from his pocket and slid it into his boot. That single gesture told me everything. The man was scared, but he was collecting evidence. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the clubhouse window, face set, jaw tight, eyes steady. I'd seen that look before, back when we were trained to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Valerie thought she was tightening her control, but what she was really doing was making witnesses, and Roger Haynes, whether he admitted it or not, had already chosen which side he'd land on when the fall came. The next HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse auditorium, a glass-walled room overlooking the canyon like a judge's balcony. Rows of white chairs filled with residents formed a polite little army, waiting for orders. Valerie Kent stood at the podium in her signature cream blazer, speaking as though nothing explosive had happened the week before. Her voice dripped with composure, but her eyes were restless, darting toward me every few sentences. She was trying to reassert dominance through calm tones and legal jargon, pretending the helicopter incident had never existed. And to maintain the community's reputation, she announced, the board has voted to suspend all private aerial operations indefinitely. This includes takeoffs, landings, and flight drills of any kind. The words indefinitely and private weren't legal terms here, they were weapons. She was building a wall around her mistake, dressing it in policy. I sat in the back row, silent, my hands folded. Nora wasn't allowed to attend. Valerie had declared it a restricted board discussion. That alone violated HOA transparency laws, but nobody dared challenge her. The only sound came from the ceiling fan, humming like a warning. Roger stood near the equipment table, pretending to check the sound system. He looked exhausted. His shirt was untucked, and every few seconds, his fingers twitched near his clipboard, like he was fighting the urge to tear up whatever orders she'd given him. Valerie continued. We have received formal complaints about noise pollution and unsafe conduct. The helicopter pad is to be removed within 30 days. If the owner refuses, the board will pursue injunctions. The crowd murmured approval, fear disguised as agreement. Most of them weren't loyal to her. They were terrified of becoming the next target. That was her power, collective silence. I raised my hand. She hesitated, then forced a brittle smile. Mr. Calloway, this is not an open forum. It will be, I said. You're about to vote on something under federal jurisdiction. I'm advising you not to proceed. Her expression curdled, but I kept going. Your authority stops at the property line. You can't regulate federally licensed airspace. You can't restrict CAL FIRE-approved emergency infrastructure. You're violating your own insurance terms just by holding this vote. She tried to interrupt, but I spoke over her, calm and steady, the way I used to in combat. Briefings when panic spread faster than logic. And before you claim ignorance, understand this. I've already submitted a copy of your new policy draft to the FAA's Regional Compliance Office. They'll review it under 14 CFR Part 157, Notice of Construction or Alteration. That means, Mrs. Kent, this vote is now a matter of federal record. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fan seemed to stop. Roger's head lifted slightly, just enough that our eyes met. His jaw tightened, and he gave the smallest nod, a flicker of relief crossing his face. He knew the tide had shifted. Valerie finally found her voice. That's absurd. You think Washington cares about a neighborhood rule? I leaned forward. They care about interference with emergency response operations. They care when someone endangers a licensed flight crew. They care when a civilian pushes a paramedic out of a moving aircraft. Gasps rippled through the audience. The words hung like smoke. Valerie froze. The name paramedic triggered instant recognition. The video had already made rounds online, though most residents had convinced themselves it was staged. Now they were realizing it wasn't. Her composure cracked. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped, grabbing her binder. But the room didn't move. People whispered. Questions spread. One man near the front asked, "Is that true? Was someone actually hurt?" Valerie ignored him, but the damage was done. I stood slowly. "You can end the meeting, Valerie, but you can't stop the FAA from opening an investigation. I suggest you cooperate before they knock on your door." She stormed out, heels clacking across the tile like hammers on a coffin lid. Roger followed at a distance, his clipboard clutched to his chest, face pale but resolute. For the first time, I saw something like defiance in him, a decision forming quietly behind his trembling hands. When the last resident left, I stayed back, standing by the window that overlooked the canyon. The evening sun cut through the glass in red bands. That helipad glowed faintly in the distance, its metal edges reflecting the last light. It wasn't just concrete, it was a promise made visible, the line between control and freedom. Outside, the maintenance lights flicked on one by one. Roger walked across the courtyard, shoulders slumped, but his stride more certain than before. He paused near the exit, glancing around before slipping a small envelope under the clubhouse door. I waited until he disappeared into the parking lot before walking over. The envelope had no name, just one word written in block letters: truth. Inside were photocopies, emails between Valerie and a local attorney, discussing how to create a regulatory excuse to devalue my property before forcing removal of the pad. She'd planned this for months. The timestamps matched the days she'd claimed the board was acting on community feedback. I tucked the papers into my jacket, the weight of them heavier than any weapon I'd ever carried. The next step wasn't mine anymore. The moment she tried to enforce that vote, the FAA's compliance division would see the contradiction between her bylaws and federal safety codes. All I had to do was hold the line and let her arrogance trigger the fall. By morning, the canyon smelled of smoke. A wildfire had sparked 2 ridges away, and the orange haze hung low over Eagle Crest bluffs like a slow-moving storm. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the kind that make your chest tighten before you even see the flames. Every instinct in me snapped awake. This was the moment our community had been preparing for, the exact scenario Valerie Kent had dismissed as improbable. The sky above shimmered with heat ripples as I stood by the helipad, checking the tether lines, confirming GPS sync, verifying the perimeter. Nora was already suiting up near the garage, her paramedic jacket gleaming with reflective stripes. "County Dispatch wants all evacuation routes cleared," she said, slipping on her headset. "They're short on landing zones. The CAL FIRE choppers can't reach half the homes here." That was exactly why I'd built this pad, to save time, to save lives. And yet, technically, I wasn't supposed to use it. Valerie's suspension order still stood, and the HOA had padlocked the community gate last night. But out here, you don't wait for permission to do the right thing. I grabbed my comms unit. "If they call for airlift, we're activating," I said. Nora nodded once. She didn't argue. She never did when it came to rescue work. At 10:24 a.m., the first call came through. An elderly couple trapped on the upper road, cut off by flames advancing faster than the fire maps predicted. I radioed CAL FIRE Command, confirmed our pad coordinates, and offered it as a forward refueling and medevac site. Their reply came instantly. "Approved. Use at discretion." When the first helicopter appeared over the ridge, its blades chopping through the smoke, the wind nearly tore the HOA flags from their poles. I guided it down, markers flashing on the pad. Nora helped the crew offload medical gear. For the first time since moving here, every second of training, every dollar spent on safety clearances, finally mattered. But of course, Valerie didn't see that. She saw violation. Her silver SUV screeched to a stop near the main road. She stormed out, waving a clipboard like a weapon. "You can't do this!" she screamed over the roar. "The board suspended all aerial operations." The CAL FIRE pilot climbed out, helmet under his arm. "Ma'am, this zone's authorized for emergency landings," he said calmly. "You're obstructing a state operation." Her face went pale. This is private property." He pointed toward the blaze cresting the hills. "So is that fire, ma'am. It doesn't care about your bylaws." Nora gave me a quick glance, half fury, half vindication. The absurdity of it all burned hotter than the smoke. Valerie wasn't afraid of the flames. She was afraid of losing control. While she argued, I spotted Roger standing near the utility shed, phone in hand. He wasn't filming the fire. He was recording her. His body language had changed completely. Shoulders squared, jaw set, eyes locked on the truth unfolding. Whatever fear he'd had before was gone. Within 20 minutes, the first evacuees arrived, coughing, soot-covered, terrified. Nora guided them into our garage-turned-triage station. I held the perimeter, logging timestamps for the helicopter rotations. Every motion was precise, methodical. This wasn't rebellion, it was duty. Valerie's voice grew hoarse from shouting. When one of the residents she'd bullied for years ran past her sobbing, thanking Nora, Something in Valerie broke. She looked around as if realizing for the first time that the community she'd ruled through, fear no longer listened to her. By early afternoon, the fire crews pulled back. The ridge stabilized, and CAL FIRE used our pad as their final departure point. Before lifting off, their captain approached me. "You ever think about working logistics for us again?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Not officially, just keeping promises." When the last chopper vanished into the haze, the silence that followed felt heavy and sacred. Ash drifted like snow across the pad. Nora sat on the steps, exhausted, wiping sweat and soot from her face. I joined her, watching Valerie pace alone near the gate, phone pressed to her ear. She was probably calling the HOA lawyer, trying to twist the narrative again. But this time, she'd lost control of the script. Every resident who'd seen what happened was already uploading videos. CAL FIRE had logged our pad as an operational emergency site, and Valerie, standing there amid the smoke, her rules meaningless, was about to learn what it meant when state law and federal safety authority collided. I didn't need to raise my voice. The fire had spoken louder than I ever could. That night, the smoke lifted, but the damage stayed. Ash covered the streets like gray frost, settling on cars, rooftops, even the HOA's welcome sign. The neighborhood was eerily silent. No lawn sprinklers, no buzzing golf carts, no neighbors walking dogs. It felt like everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. The next morning, I found my driveway blocked by an orange security cone and a printed warning stapled to it. Emergency pad, use under review, cease operations. Pending HOA legal consultation, signed again, in perfect cursive, by Valerie Kent. She'd turned a wildfire into a paperwork opportunity. I stood there for a long time, reading every word until it felt like a threat carved in plastic. Nora joined me, her hair still smelling faintly of smoke. "You think she'll try to charge us for saving those people?" "She'll try," I said, "and she'll lose." But I knew what Valerie was doing. She was racing me to the narrative. Before CAL FIRE or the FAA could finalize their reports, she was trying to bury the truth under HOA legalese. If she framed the emergency as a rogue homeowner incident, she could spin it before the regulators got there. I headed straight for my office, a converted guest house overlooking the canyon. It was my command post now. Screens glowing with weather data, FAA notifications, and community email threads. Every few minutes, a new message appeared. Residents thanking us, others asking if they'd broken HOA policy by assisting. Fear still ran deep here. Then came the one message that changed everything. It was from Roger. Subject line, "You didn't hear this from me." Attached, a PDF labeled Internal HOA Briefing, Fire Incident Response Draft. The document outlined Valerie's plan. She was preparing a press statement, blaming the helicopter crew for unauthorized interference with HOA property. Even worse, she was petitioning the board to classify the helipad as temporary infrastructure, so it could be removed without a full vote. That was the move I'd been waiting for, the kind that activated federal oversight. Under FAA regulation, any civilian complaint filed against an approved emergency pad automatically triggered review by the Aviation Safety Branch. Valerie had just submitted her own trap. I printed the document and placed it next to my permit file. The timeline was perfect. The moment she sent that petition, she unknowingly placed her name on a federal docket. Now, the FAA wouldn't just investigate her obstruction. They'd examine her misuse of authority under Title 49, Section 46307. When Nora entered, I showed her the file. "She just reported herself," I said quietly. Nora read the first lines, then shook her head. "She's trying to rewrite the story before the truth goes public." "Exactly," I replied. "So, I'll make sure the truth gets there first." By afternoon, I was at the post office filing certified copies of the document to both the FAA Western Division and CAL FIRE's Regional Safety Office. It wasn't revenge, it was procedure. Every move had to be clean, traceable, legal. That's how you win wars like this. Outside, the community was stirring again. Neighbors stood by their fences, talking in hushed tones. Roger was among them, near the maintenance truck, but he looked different. Less like a man hiding, and more like someone waiting for the storm to break. When our eyes met, he didn't look away this time. He gave a faint nod, tapping his phone pocket. the silent promise that evidence still existed. That evening, I drove past the clubhouse. Through the glass walls, I saw Valerie meeting with two board members, gesturing wildly. Papers flew, hands pointed. She was unraveling, her calm leadership veneer cracking under the pressure. Outside the door, a delivery courier dropped a thick envelope on the counter marked Federal Aviation Administration, Regional Inquiry Division. The timing was perfect. She'd learn what real authority looked like soon enough. Back home, Nora was on the porch, watching the canyon fade to blue dusk. "You think this will stop her?" she asked. "No," I said, settling beside her. But it'll slow her down until she realizes she's not the one making the rules anymore." The wind shifted, carrying a faint hum, the distant sound of helicopters still scanning the ridge. For me, that noise wasn't chaos. It was justice approaching, steady and inevitable. Valerie had built her empire on bylaws and fear. Now those same bylaws had turned into the rope tightening around her name. The FAA wouldn't just see a safety violation, they'd see a pattern of obstruction tied to her leadership. The next move wouldn't come from me. It would come from Washington. The next morning came with fog rolling off the canyon, thick enough to swallow sound. The air smelled of wet ash and eucalyptus, the kind of silence that makes you hear your own pulse. I was on the helipad again, running my hands over the steel tether hooks when I heard footsteps crunching gravel behind me. I didn't turn. I already knew who it was. "Roger," I said quietly, "you look like a man who hasn't slept." He stopped a few feet away, clutching his clipboard against his chest. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders drawn in like he was trying to fold himself smaller. The fog beaded on his jacket, his hands trembling around the edges of a folder. "She's losing it," he muttered, glancing around as if the wind might carry his words to Valerie. "She's calling emergency meetings every night now. Says we have to control the narrative before the FAA arrives." I didn't say anything. He exhaled, his breath breaking the fog in front of him. "She told me to delete the maintenance server logs." I turned then, slowly. "The ones that track noise readings and flight alerts?" He nodded. "And the HOA cameras. She wants every clip from the day of the wildfire erased, says it's privacy protection. But she's not protecting privacy, Ethan. She's covering herself." The way his voice cracked on that last word made something in me tighten. This was it, the moment his loyalty snapped under its own weight. He dropped the folder on the ground between us. Inside were printed screenshots, emails, and time-stamped footage stills from the HOA's security system. One frame stopped my breath. The helicopter hovering during the evacuation, Valerie standing near the gate yelling into her phone, a half-dozen residents watching in disbelief. In the next frame, she was gesturing toward the aircraft like a commander ordering fire. "I shouldn't have these," Roger said, his voice trembling. "She made me sign an NDA when I took this job, but after what happened with the fire, after seeing... People thank Nora for saving their parents. I can't be part of her lies anymore." He rubbed his neck, staring at the ground. "I thought following orders made life easier, but this feels like war, and I'm on the wrong side." I crouched to pick up the papers. "You're not anymore," I said. "You just changed sides." He shook his head. "You don't understand. She's got files on everyone, board members, residents. She threatens to fine them, blacklist them with the insurance company. That's how she keeps control. If this goes public, she'll come after me." I studied his face, drawn, exhausted, but honest. "Roger, what you just gave me isn't just evidence," I said. "It's federal-grade data tampering. The FAA will need this to prove she obstructed a safety operation. You won't be the villain in their eyes, you'll be the whistleblower." He blinked, like the word whistleblower hadn't belonged to him until now. His grip on the clipboard loosened. "You'll really report it?" "I already have," I said. "What you gave me fills the gap in the timeline. They'll see it was intentional." He let out a shaky breath, half relief, half terror. "If she finds out, she won't," I interrupted. "By the time she realizes the FAA's looking at her, this evidence will already be logged under federal chain of custody." The fog shifted then, revealing the houses down the ridge, quiet, still, ignorant of the war being fought in their own HOA. Roger followed my gaze. "You ever wonder how she got like this?" he asked softly. "It's like she needs control to feel real." I nodded. "I've seen that before. in combat. People who can't lead without fear usually end up destroying what they're trying to protect, he laughed bitterly. Guess we're living proof. He handed me a small flash drive, barely the size of a thumb. That's the original video from the clubhouse camera, the one she told me to wipe. It has audio. My pulse jumped. Audio? He nodded again. You can hear her yelling right before Nora was pushed. The microphones caught everything. I closed my fist around it. This was the nail in the coffin. Not speculation, not rumor. Proof of interference with a licensed aircraft. Valerie's downfall was now a matter of time and file transfer. As Roger turned to leave, he paused halfway up the slope. You're really going through with this? I met his eyes. I don't start fights I can't finish. He gave a slow, tired nod. Then I guess I just picked the right side. When he disappeared into the mist, I stood there alone, the flash drive burning cold in my palm. The wind shifted east, carrying faint echoes of the canyon, like the world itself was exhaling after a long hold. I slipped the drive into my pocket. The next step wasn't about defiance anymore. It was about accountability. Valerie thought she was playing neighborhood, politics. She was about to find out she'd committed a federal offense. The fog had burned off by midday, leaving the canyon exposed and sharp beneath the sun. I sat in the living room, blinds half closed, the flash drive Roger gave me plugged into my laptop. The audio file loaded slow, almost like it didn't want to be heard. Then Valerie's voice came through, clipped, cold, and unmistakable. Don't touch the emergency pad. I don't care if CAL FIRE calls again. If they use it, we lose jurisdiction. Do you understand? Another voice, nervous and small, Roger's, answered, But people could get hurt. I'm not here to save people, Valerie snapped. I'm here to protect property values. The file ended there, 34 seconds of pure negligence recorded in perfect clarity. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling as that last line repeated in my head. Not to save people, to protect property. That single sentence could ruin her. But the timing mattered. If I released this now, she'd bury it under legal stall tactics. If I waited until the FAA hearing, it would land like a missile. I opened my email, drafting a message to the FAA investigator assigned to our case, attaching the clip and log data. Before I could hit send, my phone buzzed. A text from Roger. She knows I gave you something. She's calling an emergency vote tonight. I exhaled through my teeth. The move was fast, desperate. Valerie wasn't just fighting to stay in power now. She was trying to rewrite the history of her own mistake. I grabbed my jacket, pocketed the drive, and headed out. The clubhouse parking lot was already full when I arrived. Residents milled around, murmuring like spectators before a trial. Inside, Valerie stood behind the podium, her smile stretched thin enough to tear. Thank you all for coming, she began. Recent events have placed our community's reputation under scrutiny. In response, I am introducing a resolution to permanently remove unauthorized infrastructure, beginning with the helipad behind Mr. Calloway's residence. There it was, her last stand disguised as policy. I took a seat near the back, every eye flicking toward me. Roger was there too, sitting by the maintenance exit. His shoulders were tight, his fingers drumming on his knee. He looked ready to bolt. Valerie's tone shifted, almost saccharine. Now, I'm sure Mr. Calloway means well, but personal facilities cannot override community safety. We all saw what happens when unlicensed activity invites disaster. The irony nearly made me laugh. She was invoking safety after nearly killing my wife. I waited until the applause faded, then stood. You want to talk about safety? I said. Let's start with what's on this file. The room stilled. I pulled a small speaker from my pocket, connected the drive, and pressed play. Valerie's voice filled the air. I'm not here to save people. I'm here to protect property values. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, someone muttering, "Oh my God." Valerie's face drained of color. That's taken out of context, she stammered. That's an invasion of privacy. Roger stood then, his voice shaking but clear. No, it's not. That was recorded on HOA security equipment. She ordered me to delete it. He pulled his clipboard from under his arm and set it on the table like an offering. I can prove it. Her head whipped toward him. Roger, don't. He didn't flinch this time. You told me to falsify reports. You told me to erase flight data. I have copies of everything. I kept them because I couldn't live with what we'd done. The room turned into a storm. Board members whispered, neighbors leaned forward, phones recorded every second. I stayed silent. This was Roger's moment, not mine. Valerie slammed her binder shut. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted, voice cracking. But no one moved. 2 residents stepped in front of the exit, blocking her path. Another woman raised her phone, streaming live. Roger turned toward me, pale but steady. "Do it," he said softly. I hit send on the email to the FAA, attaching the recording, the timestamps, and his statement. The progress bar filled on my screen, then disappeared. Sent. Valerie's expression shifted from rage to realization, the kind that comes when someone finally understands the scope of their own mistake. I didn't need to say another word. The system she'd built to control everyone had just turned against her. And this time, there were witnesses everywhere. Valerie didn't show up the next morning. For the first time in 2 years, the HOA office doors stayed locked, the blinds drawn. The parking lot, usually reserved for board members and visiting inspectors, sat empty except for Roger's maintenance truck. The air around Eagle Crest Bluffs felt different, quiet but charged, like the calm that follows a lightning strike. Nora brewed coffee in the kitchen, while I reread the FAA's acknowledgement email on my phone. The subject line was short and heavy. Federal inquiry initiated. Case reference, YAFIS 1189. They'd received the recordings, confirmed authenticity, and were dispatching an investigator within 72 hours. I could almost hear the gears of bureaucracy beginning to grind into motion, slow but unstoppable. "She's not going to wait for them," Nora said from the counter. "Valerie's too proud. She'll try to spin something before they show." "Then we stay ahead of her," I said. By noon, word had spread across the neighborhood. A cluster of residents gathered outside the clubhouse, phones in hand, speculating. Some were furious, others nervous, but one thing was clear. The old fear was gone. Valerie's power had depended on silence, and silence had just cracked open. When I arrived, Roger was already there, leaning against his truck, arms folded. He looked exhausted, but lighter, like a man finally breathing again. "She's been calling board members since sunrise," he said quietly. "Tried to convince them the audio was edited, but they know. The timestamp matches our server logs exactly." "Good," I said. "Let her keep talking. Every word digs the hole deeper." The clubhouse doors opened suddenly, and Valerie stepped out. Sunglasses, scarf, perfect posture, but her voice trembled when she spoke. "Everyone, please. There's been a misunderstanding. These so-called recordings were taken without authorization. They've been manipulated," a resident interrupted, "because my husband was there when you yelled at the pilot." Another neighbor spoke up. "We saw the fire crews using Ethan's pad. They saved my Aunt Valerie. You tried to shut them down." The crowd grew bolder, words turning to shouts. For years they'd whispered behind closed doors. Now they were reclaiming their voices. Valerie's smile faltered. She turned toward me. "You think this makes you a hero, Calloway? You endangered this community for your ego." I stepped forward. "I risked my life for this community. You endangered it to feed your authority." The murmurs swelled again. She tried to speak, but the sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the noise. A white government SUV pulling into the lot. The seal on the door read, Federal Aviation Administration, Regional Safety Office. Every head turned. The agent stepped out, a tall man in a gray suit with a folder tucked under his arm. "Mrs. Valerie Kent," he called. "We're here to discuss a federal inquiry into obstruction of emergency air operations." Her composure cracked completely. "You can't just... This is private property." The agent's tone didn't waver. "Under Title 49, ma'am, interference with a certified air safety operation is a federal matter. You've been named in the complaint." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She tried to walk away, but another agent stepped forward, blocking her path. Roger lowered his gaze, exhaling slow, almost painfully. "It's done," he whispered. Inside the clubhouse, the agents conducted their preliminary review. They asked questions, logged statements, collected the digital files I'd submitted. Roger provided authentication for the security system and confirmed the chain of custody. Every keystroke she'd made, every deleted file, now worked against her. When the agents emerged an hour later, they handed Valerie a formal notice. Her HOA presidency was suspended pending investigation, and the entire board would fall under administrative review. She stood there, trembling, her power evaporating in the open air. The neighbors she'd ruled through fear wouldn't even look at her. I didn't celebrate. I just watched quietly, because justice isn't supposed to feel triumphant. It's supposed to feel right. Nora appeared beside me, arms folded, eyes steady. "You think this is over?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. "But for the first time, it's heading where it should." As Valerie was escorted back into the clubhouse for formal questioning, Roger approached, rubbing his hands together like he couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. "They said they might call me to testify," he murmured. "You'll be fine," I said. "You told the truth. That's all they needed." He nodded, but his eyes drifted toward the horizon, the ridge that nearly burned, the place where everything began. "She'll never understand, will she, that we weren't her enemies? We just wanted to live without fear." "No," I said. "Control doesn't understand freedom until it loses it." The sun dipped behind the canyon, painting everything in gold. The helicopters from CAL FIRE passed overhead again, slow and distant this time, a sound that once divided the neighborhood now pulling it together. For the first time since we moved here, Eagle Crest Bluffs felt quiet in the right way. Not from fear, from peace earned. By sunset, the ridge burned orange again, but this time from light, not fire. News vans lined the cul-de-sac, their satellite dishes tilted toward the sky. Residents gathered on the sidewalks, whispering and filming, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The FAA team hadn't left. They'd set up a temporary field desk in the community park, turning the manicured lawn into a federal operations zone. I stood near the flagpole with Nora, both of us quiet. It felt surreal. The same HOA that fined us for unauthorized grass trimming now crawling with investigators. The agency didn't need permission to be here anymore. They were operating under federal jurisdiction. Across the street, Valerie emerged from the clubhouse under escort. Her expression was frozen somewhere between outrage and disbelief. The camera swiveled instantly. She raised a hand to shield her face, but there was no hiding from this. The same woman who once staged photo ops about community unity was now being questioned under the emergency light of a federal probe. Roger lingered near the maintenance shed, avoiding the attention. I caught his eye, and he gave me a faint nod. His testimony had been recorded that afternoon, verifying every minute of the audio file. He looked drained, but also lighter, as if the truth itself had been oxygen. The lead investigator, Agent Cole, approached me with a clipboard. "Mr. Calloway, we've reviewed your correspondence and data logs. You'll be receiving a formal notice confirming that your landing zone is a state-recognized emergency site. Your cooperation's been exemplary." I returned the handshake. "Appreciate it, Agent." He lowered his voice. "We'll also be forwarding our findings to the state attorney's office. There's potential criminal liability in her actions, false reporting, interference with safety operations. This isn't ending. Here." I glanced toward Valerie, who was pacing near the fountain, her once immaculate hair falling loose in the wind. She still carried herself like a queen, but her court was gone. Board members avoided her eyes, residents whispered, and the facade that had held this place together was cracking beyond repair. As night fell, the investigators packed up their files and equipment. The crowd began to disperse, though the whispers didn't fade. I lingered by the park fence, watching Valerie as she sat alone on the stone bench beneath the HOA banner. The word integrity, stitched in gold, fluttered above her head like a cruel joke. Roger joined me after a while, hands in his pockets. "You ever think it'd come to this?" "I did," I said. "Just didn't think it'd happen this fast." He nodded slowly. "When I saw those agents walk in, I thought she'd still talk her way out of it. But when they read her the charges, she looked human for the first time. Scared." The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of distant rotors. Nora stepped out from the crowd, phone in hand. "You might want to see this," she said. She showed me the live news feed. Our story had already gone national. The headline scrolled across the bottom. HOA president under federal investigation after blocking emergency rescue flights. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of it all, the weeks of pressure, the fire, the confrontation, the lies, collapsed into quiet relief. Roger exhaled slowly. "You realize this means they'll dissolve the board, right? We'll have to rebuild from scratch." "Good," I said. "This time, Maybe they'll remember what community actually means. When the last van left and the street emptied, I walked back toward the helipad. The floodlights hummed softly, casting silver halos on the surface. Nora followed behind me, stepping carefully over the gravel. "Feels strange," she said, "winning like this." "It's not a win," I replied. "It's correction." I looked out over the canyon, the same ridge that had nearly burned, the same airspace Valerie once claimed to control. Now it was open, silent, infinite. My reflection stared back from the steel pad, the same one she'd tried to erase. In the distance, Roger was locking the clubhouse doors for the final time under her authority. The faint click echoed across the lot, a small, almost sacred sound. Nora slipped her arm around me. "So, what happens now?" "Now," I said, glancing up at the stars beginning to pierce the smoke-stained sky. "Now the air's clear." The following week, the community center filled to a capacity for the emergency town assembly. Folding chairs lined the hall, cameras were mounted on tripods, and local reporters hovered near the back with notebooks open. The state attorney's office had ordered a public hearing, standard procedure when an HOA's federal violations overlap with community governance. For Eagle Crest Bluffs, it felt like a reckoning. I sat in the second row beside Nora, her hand resting on mine. Roger stood near the front, flanked by two officials from the FAA's safety division. The podium stood empty under the bright fluorescent lights, waiting for the board that no longer existed. The sound of murmured conversation filled the air, neighbors whispering the things they'd never dared to say when Valerie still ruled over them. When the door finally opened, Valerie Kent walked in. The crowd went silent. She wore black instead of her usual pastel colors, her face pale, jaw tight. The same woman who once commanded every meeting now looked like she was walking into her own trial. She set her papers on the podium with trembling hands, her pearl earrings swaying as she looked over the crowd. "Before we begin," she said, her voice catching, "I'd like to remind everyone that this community was built on shared respect. Mistakes were made." Someone from the back interrupted. "You almost got people killed." Gasps rippled through the room. Valerie's eyes flashed with something, anger, maybe pride, but she forced a brittle smile. "The helicopter incident was exaggerated. There was no danger to anyone's life." That was my cue. I stood slowly, the murmur shifting toward me like a wave. "You pushed my wife out of a moving aircraft, Valerie," I said. "We have video, audio, and FAA witness statements. Don't call that an exaggeration." She froze, caught between defiance and fear. "That footage was manipulated?" "Enough," I cut in. "You lied to this entire community. You forged violations. You falsified safety records. You tried to destroy my family to protect your ego." The tension in the room cracked open. Someone clapped, then another, and suddenly there was a low rumble of applause spreading through the crowd. Not celebration, but release. Years of silence finally breaking. Valerie raised her voice, desperate. "You think you can turn this neighborhood against me? I kept this place safe. I protected your property values, your families." Roger stepped forward from the front row. "You protected yourself, Valerie. The rest of us were just paying for your control." The crowd murmured again. A woman in the third row, one of the elderly residents Nora had evacuated during the fire, stood up with a cane. "That man's helipad saved my life," she said loudly. "You called it a violation. I call it mercy." The applause this time was louder, sharper. Valerie's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. She turned to the FAA official standing near the dais. "This is harassment. I demand the right to respond." The agent nodded calmly. "You'll have that opportunity during the administrative review. But for now, this meeting is public record. You may speak freely, Mrs. Kent, but so may they." The silence that followed was suffocating. Valerie swallowed, gripping the podium like it was the only thing holding her up. "You've all forgotten what it takes to run a community," she said. "Rules exist for a reason. Without me, this place will fall apart." I stepped closer to the aisle, my voice steady. "No, Valerie. Without you, this place will finally breathe." The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping, voices overlapping, until the entire hall pulsed with noise. The sound wasn't vengeful. It was vindication. Nora rose beside me, smiling faintly through tears. Roger's eyes glistened as he stared at the scene he never thought he'd witness. The FAA agent cleared his throat, calling the room to order. Based on the evidence reviewed, the Federal Aviation Administration and state authorities are suspending all HOA authority in Eagle Crest Bluffs until a lawful reorganization can occur. All pending fines, restrictions, and disciplinary actions issued under Mrs. Kent's tenure are hereby nullified. Gasps, then more applause. Valerie's hands shook violently. Her papers slipped from the podium, fluttering across the floor like white flags. She didn't bend to pick them up. She looked at me one last time, eyes burning with something between hatred and disbelief. "You think you won?" she hissed quietly. "No," I said. The truth did. Security escorted her out through the side exit as residents rose from their chairs, some hugging, others wiping their eyes. For the first time since we'd moved here, no one was afraid to speak. Outside, the evening air felt cool and alive. The HOA banner that once hung over the entrance had been taken down, leaving only the bare wooden frame swaying in the wind. Roger stepped out behind me, running a hand through his hair. "You realize," he said softly, "we just lived through history." I smiled faintly. "No," I replied, watching Nora walk ahead toward the helipad glowing faintly in the dusk. "We lived through justice." 3 weeks later, Eagle Crest Bluffs didn't look the same. The fences had been repainted, the flags replaced, and the oppressive silence that once ruled every morning had lifted. Children played near the cul-de-sac again, their laughter echoing against the canyon walls where fear used to live. For the first time in years, the community felt like it belonged to the people, not a signature on Valerie Kent's clipboard. I stood on the helipad at sunrise, coffee in hand, watching the first light sweep over the valley. The steel surface gleamed like a promise kept. Behind me, the new interim committee, neighbors who'd once been too afraid to speak, was setting up folding tables in the park for their first open meeting. Roger was among them, clipboard still in hand, but now his posture was straight, confident. He caught my eye from across the road and gave a small wave. "Never thought I'd say this," he called out, "but paperwork doesn't scare me anymore." "Good," I said, smiling. "It's safer in your hands than hers." Nora joined me, her arm brushing mine, the morning wind lifting her hair. "You know," she said softly, "for someone who swore he was retired, you sure started a new kind of mission." I laughed quietly. Maybe I just traded one battlefield for another. The FAA had officially closed their case 2 days earlier. Valerie Kent's name now sat on a federal registry of barred HOA officers, an administrative scar that would follow her for life. The findings were published publicly: obstruction of emergency operations, falsification of safety reports, and violation of federal aviation compliance. No arrests were needed. The exposure alone had destroyed her empire. But the victory wasn't about punishment. It was about reclamation. When the community voted to dissolve the old HOA entirely, they asked me to oversee the transition as a safety liaison. I declined the title, but agreed to advise. I didn't want power. I wanted protection for the people who'd lived under fear disguised as order. The new charter focused on transparency, safety, and mutual respect. Roger would handle logistics. Nora would oversee the community's medical readiness plan. Together, they'd rebuild what arrogance had broken. By afternoon, the new board meeting began in the open air. No closed doors, no secret ballots. Residents brought lawn chairs, kids ran between tables, and someone passed out lemonade. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When it was my turn to speak, I stood beside the old HOA banner, now rolled up on the grass. The gold letters Eagle Crest Bluffs faded from smoke and sun. "A year ago," I said, "we thought control was safety. We thought silence was peace. But safety isn't control, it's trust. And peace isn't silence, it's understanding. What happened here shouldn't have needed federal intervention. It should have come from us." Heads nodded through the crowd. Some clapped quietly. Roger smiled, proud but humble. Nora squeezed my hand. Afterward, people approached to thank us. Neighbors who'd once avoided eye contact, now talking freely, telling stories about fines, intimidation, and years of quiet resentment. One man said he'd been fined for having a dent in his mailbox. Another woman admitted she'd sold her home 2 streets over just to escape Valerie's harassment. Now, for the first time, they felt safe staying. As the sun dipped low, I walked back to the helipad. The air smelled of cooling stone and pine. I could hear laughter in the distance, the kind that sounded like rebuilding. Nora followed, stepping into the fading light beside me. "You think she'll ever come back?" she asked. "Not here," I said. "And even if she tried, this place wouldn't let her." We stood in silence for a while, watching the canyon turn gold, the sky dimming into violet. When the wind rose, it carried the faint echo of rotor blades from somewhere far off. Cal Fire Patrol crossing the horizon. I watched it fade into the distance, proud of the sound, proud of what it meant now. That pad had started as my insurance policy, then became my curse, and finally, my victory. Not because I won against her, but because I proved what integrity can outlast. I turned toward the camera I'd set on the railing, recording the story for others who might face their own battles. "If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny," I said, voice steady, "hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from." The red light blinked once. Behind me, the sky blazed open with color, freedom finally earned.